In July of 1996, Janet Camella was 57 years old and hiking the Grand Canyon with her husband on a planned 4-day backcountry trip. They had a permit. They were on the Hermit Trail, about 6 miles below the rim. She died of heat exhaustion. Not from a fall, not from stepping over an edge. Not from the hazard most people picture when they look at this trail. And that distinction matters, because the public record on Hermit Trail is incomplete. There is no official trail-only death total, no clean annual fatality rate, and no defensible statistic saying one cause is officially number one here. But when you look at the Hermit deaths that are documented well enough to examine, the same physiological pattern keeps appearing. Heat, exertion, water loss, and a body that still has to climb after most of its reserve has already been spent. That is the trap. Hermit Trail looks like a cliff problem. The broader Grand Canyon record says medical deaths are the larger category, and Hermit adds something especially unpleasant to that equation. The hardest half of the hike comes after the easy half has already carried you thousands of feet away from safety. This channel breaks down why dangerous places kill using the actual record, so subscribe if that is the kind of explanation you want. By the end, you will understand what makes Hermit Trail deadly, why the obvious danger is not the whole story, and why feeling fine on the way down tells you almost nothing about whether you can get back out. Start with the scale of the place around it. Grand Canyon National Park recorded 430,653 recreational visits in 2025. In that same year, the park reported 11 fatalities, 232 search and rescue incidents, and 848 emergency medical incidents. Those numbers are not Hermit Trail numbers. They are park-wide. That distinction matters. But they tell you what kind of operating environment Hermit belongs to. Millions of visitors moving through terrain where medical emergencies and rescues are routine enough to require a permanent system built around them. The cleaner mortality window is 2014 through 2019, the period the National Park Service identifies as fully validated in its mortality data. During those 6 years, Grand Canyon recorded 103 deaths. 49 were categorized as medical deaths. Secondary analysis of that same validated period identified 34 unintentional deaths, including 14 falls, 8 drownings, and 8 environmental deaths. So even before we narrow the lens to Hermit, the first assumption is already wrong. The Grand Canyon is famous for cliffs. Yet in the strongest validated mortality window, medical deaths outnumbered fatal falls by a wide margin. And rescue volume tells a similar story. A current park page says more than 300 people are rescued from the canyon each year. Grand Canyon Conservancy describes roughly 310 search and rescue incidents annually. The definitions are not identical, but the operational point is the same. People get into trouble here constantly enough that rescue is part of the landscape. The question is why Hermit is so good at turning ordinary hiking stress into something that can outrun you. Hermit begins near Hermit's Rest, a developed park destination reached by shuttle, with restrooms, drinking water, food, and a gift shop nearby. Then the trail changes the rules. The trailhead sits at about 6,640 feet. From there, the Upper Hermit Trail drops almost 2,000 vertical feet in its first 2.5 miles. Santa Maria Spring is also about 2.5 miles from the trailhead, roughly 1,680 feet lower, and the park estimates 4 to 6 hours for the round trip. There is no drinking water provided along the Hermit Trail itself. Natural spring water has to be treated. That is a remarkable shift over a very short distance, from shuttle stops and developed facilities to a route the National Park Service describes as being for experienced desert hikers only, and more difficult than Bright Angel or South Kaibab. Your brain notices the infrastructure first, then gravity starts helping. This is where Hermit gets deceptive. On a normal mountain, the hard part announces itself at the beginning. You climb. Your breathing gets harder. Your legs tell you what the day will cost. If you are underprepared, you often learn that while the route home is still downhill. Hermit reverses that sequence. You begin by descending. You are fresh. Every step takes you lower, with less cardiovascular work then the climb will demand later. The distance accumulates before the true price becomes obvious. The National Park Service describes canyon hikers as being lured by initially easy downhill hiking. It tells hikers to budget roughly 1/3 of their time for descending and 2/3 for climbing out, because the ascent can take about twice as long. That is the signature of this trail. Hermit is an inverted mountain. It gives you the cheap half first. Then it sends the bill when you are farthest from the trailhead. Here is what the data actually says. If you widen the frame to Grand Canyon mortality, medical and natural causes are not a side category. In the validated 2014 to 2019 period, 49 of 103 deaths were medical. 14 were unintentional falls. That does not mean falls are harmless. Hermit is steep, rocky, exposed, and eroded. A fall can absolutely kill you here. It means the most visible hazard is not the only system you should fear. For Hermit specifically, the best documented fatal pattern in the dossier is heat plus prolonged exertion. 3 adequately sourced Hermit or Hermit Tonto deaths from 1996, 1999, and 2021 involved heat exhaustion, running out of water, or suspected heat illness. That is not enough to declare heat the official leading killer on Hermit Trail. There is no complete trail-level mortality database to support that claim. But it is enough to notice the pattern. The physical mechanism is straightforward. Your muscles generate heat while you hike. To get rid of it, your body pushes more blood toward the skin and produces sweat. At the same time, your working muscles are asking for blood and oxygen. If you are losing fluid, circulating volume begins to fall while those demands continue. Now add the climb. The body has to maintain blood pressure, cool itself, feed working muscle, and keep the brain supplied while you are moving uphill through a hotter environment than the rim you started from. Inner Canyon summer shade temperatures can exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit, or 43 Celsius. During extreme heat, the park strongly recommends staying off Inner Canyon trails between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. If thermoregulation fails, this stops being a problem of discomfort. Severe heat stroke can produce central nervous system dysfunction, systemic inflammation, problems with coagulation, and multi-organ failure. And there is an especially dangerous detail buried inside that process. Your brain is part of the body getting overheated. So the organ you need to make the decision to stop, turn around, rest, or seek help can become less reliable as the danger increases. The trail is not only taking water and energy from you, it can start taking judgment too. This is why medical collapse deserves to come before the more cinematic hazards. A steep ascent imposes sustained cardiovascular work. Heat increases that demand because the body is also diverting blood toward the skin to shed heat. Dehydration reduces circulating volume further. Your heart is now servicing several competing jobs at once. For a person with coronary disease, an arrhythmia, or another latent condition, prolonged uphill exertion can expose a vulnerability that daily life never revealed. Mountain hiking research has repeatedly identified sudden cardiac death as an important non-traumatic killer, particularly among older men and people who are not regularly conditioned for mountain exertion. Grand Canyon's own guidance warns that altitude, strenuous climbing, dehydration, and intense inner canyon heat can combine to worsen existing medical conditions. That is the part people do not pack for. You can pack water, you can buy better shoes, you can study the route, you can check the weather. You cannot look at your chest and know exactly how much cardiovascular reserve you have left after hours of climbing in heat. Grand Canyon physician Dr. Tom Myers has described an increasing population of older visitors attempting major canyon objectives and overestimating what their current bodies can tolerate. That does not make those visitors foolish. It makes the problem harder to see. Medical collapse does not need a dramatic mistake. It can happen on an ordinary piece of trail while a person is doing exactly what hiking requires, continuing to climb. And on Hermit, that climbing starts after the descent has already committed you to the distance. The canyon keeps a ledger. Elevation, heat, fluid loss, and exertion all go on it. Your heart is one of the systems that eventually has to pay. Heat is where the Hermit-specific record becomes much more concrete. A Grand Canyon study covering the warm seasons from 2004 through 2009 identified 474 non-fatal heat-related illness cases and 6 heat-related fatalities. 90% of the non-fatal cases involved hikers. About 40% required helicopter evacuation. That is not a minor inconvenience category. In 1996, Janet Camella was 57, hiking with her husband on a 4-day backcountry trip. They had a permit. Associated Press reporting says she died of heat exhaustion about 6 miles below the rim on Hermit Trail. That is all we need from the incident. No invented final thoughts. No lesson built on assumptions about what she should have done. The important point is that this happened during a legitimate planned backpacking trip, not while someone was posing at an overlook. Heat illness works by turning the body's cooling system into a losing competition. Sweating removes heat, but it costs water. Sending blood toward the skin helps cooling, but that blood is also needed by working muscle. The harder and longer you hike, the more metabolic heat you create. If fluid losses reduce circulating volume, the heart has to work harder to maintain output. Then the environment adds more heat from outside. Inner canyon shade temperatures can exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, while full sun conditions can be hotter. The rim can feel comparatively comfortable, while the route below is operating under a different thermal regime. That difference matters, because a hiker can make the decision to descend based on conditions that will not exist several thousand feet lower, and dry air can make the danger less obvious. Sweat evaporates quickly. You may not feel soaked even while losing substantial water. When severe heat illness progresses, cognition can deteriorate. Confusion and abnormal behavior are not side effects to ignore. They are part of the medical emergency. Which means the familiar safety question, "Wouldn't I know when I was getting into trouble?" has an uncomfortable answer. Not necessarily. By the time your behavior looks wrong, the system you use to judge your own condition may already be part of the injury. Now come back to the hazard everyone noticed at the beginning. Falls are real. In the validated 2014 to 2019 Grand Canyon mortality window, 14 unintentional fall deaths were identified. Hermit itself is rocky, strenuous, and more difficult than the main corridor trails, with historic paving heavily degraded by erosion. But a fatal fall does not require a theatrical step off a sheer cliff. On steep terrain, a small loss of footing can become unrecoverable when your center of mass moves beyond the stance your feet can support. Loose rock, worn trail surfaces, fatigue, and reduced coordination make that initial mistake more likely. Gravity does the rest. Fatigue matters because the return climb follows hours of descending and sustained movement. Muscle control is not the same at the end of a long hot day as it was at the trailhead. That turns falls into part of the larger system rather than a separate villain. Heat can reduce judgment. Dehydration can reduce performance. Long exertion can reduce coordination. The terrain then converts one ordinary misstep into trauma. There is a 2009 Hermit case that shows why the record has to be handled carefully. A hiker's body was found about 200 feet below Hermit Trail, and helicopter recovery was required. But the Public National Park Service report did not establish the cause of death, so we do not call it a fall death. That restraint matters, because this whole subject becomes less useful the moment the story starts filling gaps the evidence does not. And the next mechanism is exactly the kind of thing bad advice can make worse. If you have ever gone farther on a trail because you still felt fine, tell me in the comments, and drop a like if this is changing how you think about canyon hiking. Because the next danger is what happens when the obvious solution, drinking more water, becomes part of the problem. Suspected hyponatremia represented 19% of non-fatal heat-related illness assessments in the Grand Canyon study from 2004 through 2009. The National Park Service warns Hermit hikers about it directly. The mechanism is almost the mirror image of dehydration. During prolonged exercise, if you consume hypotonic fluid faster than your body can eliminate it, the sodium concentration in your blood can fall. Exercise, heat, nausea, and other stresses can also stimulate vasopressin, causing the kidneys to retain water when they would otherwise excrete more of it. Now water starts moving into cells. When that includes brain cells, the result can be headache, vomiting, confusion, seizures, coma, and death. That is why drink as much water as possible is not a complete safety rule. A person can be diligently drinking and still be moving toward a medical emergency. Early symptoms can also resemble heat exhaustion, even though the underlying problem is different. There is a published fatal Grand Canyon wilderness hiking case involving hyponatremia, but the dossier does not identify a Hermit-specific fatal case. So, this belongs in the mechanism tour, not in a claim that it frequently kills people on this particular trail. The point is narrower and more useful. In this environment, even hydration has to be managed, rather than reduced to a slogan. And Hermit is not only a summer problem. The trail begins above 6,600 feet. In December 2002, a 30-year-old day hiker became disoriented on Hermit Trail during a severe snowstorm and spent the night stranded on a ledge below the rim. The reported overnight low was 3 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. He survived and was rescued. This was not a fatality, but it shows the range of conditions hidden by the word desert. Cold, wind, snow, and wet clothing increase heat loss. As body temperature falls, fine motor control and cognition deteriorate, which makes navigation and self-rescue harder at exactly the time they matter most. Hermit can punish the assumption that Grand Canyon danger always looks like summer heat. The larger pattern is not one hazard. It is shrinking margin. This is the point where the causes stop behaving like separate chapters. They stack. You descend almost 2,000 feet in the first 2.5 miles. The park tells canyon hikers to budget about 1/3 of their time for going down and 2/3 for coming back up. In summer, inner canyon shade temperatures can exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit. None of those facts needs to kill you by itself. The danger is what happens when they arrive in sequence. The descent spends distance. Heat spends water. Exertion spends cardiovascular reserve. Hours on the trail spend coordination. And if heat begins affecting cognition, the person managing all those losses becomes less reliable at managing them. That is why the inverted mountain lens matters. The canyon keeps a ledger. You may feel good while the account is going negative, because the most expensive transaction has not happened yet. The climb is still waiting. Then a small problem that would be manageable near the trailhead becomes harder to solve. A wrong pacing decision matters more. A missed rest matters more. A minor stumble matters more. A medical condition that never announced itself in ordinary life matters more. The hazards do not simply add together. They reduce the amount of error you can survive. And once the margin gets thin enough, your own decision-making becomes the next mechanism in the chain. This is where Hermit becomes personal. The National Park Service says canyon hikers are lured by initially easy downhill hiking. That sentence describes more than terrain. It describes a cognitive setup. You start fresh. Gravity helps. The developed trailhead is behind you, but the route initially rewards forward movement. Nothing about those first downhill miles forces you to confront the climb that will be required later. So your brain uses the information it has now. I feel fine. I am making good time. This distance is manageable. Those exact thoughts are not taken from any victim, and they should never be assigned to one. But as a general planning problem, the canyon's geometry is clear. The physical test you use to judge yourself on the way in is not the test you will face on the way out. Then, heat adds another layer. Research summarized in the dossier finds that prolonged exercise and heat can impair complex cognitive performance and decision-making. Experimental work has also shown visuomotor performance worsening under exercise heat stress and deteriorating further with dehydration. And severe heat stroke itself is defined partly by central nervous system dysfunction, including confusion and abnormal behavior. The feedback loop is ugly. You need good judgment to escape heat. Heat can degrade judgment. Degraded judgment can keep you moving in heat. The 2021 death of Michelle Meter makes that mechanism concrete. without requiring us to invent anything about her mind. Meter was 53, and on a multi-day backpacking itinerary, from Hermit to Bright Angel Trail. The National Park Service reported that while hiking down Hermit Trail on June 19th, she became disoriented and later unconscious. Rangers responding the following day determined that she was deceased. The cause was believed to be heat-related. The reported high at Phantom Ranch on June 20th was about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. We do not know what she thought. We do not know why she continued. The record does not give us that. What it does give us is disorientation. That is enough. Because the most frightening psychological fact here is not that people ignore danger. It is that the environment can impair the instrument they use to recognize it. Then there is the assumption that if something goes wrong, help will simply come. Hermit's official day hiking guide says rescue is not guaranteed, and assistance may take hours or days because of weather or other emergencies. Hours or days. In 2025, Grand Canyon recorded 232 search and rescue incidents and 848 emergency medical incidents. The system is busy, and the terrain determines what rescuers can physically do. The park warns that response during extreme heat can be delayed by limited staff, simultaneous rescue calls, employee safety requirements, limited helicopter flying capability in extreme heat, and bad weather. That means the same heat hurting a patient can also restrict the machine people imagine will instantly lift them out. Rescue here can involve technical rope teams, litter carries, helicopters, and ground searches through remote terrain. The 2009 Hermit Basin recovery shows the access problem without requiring us to speculate about the man's cause of death. Search personnel spent days narrowing the area before spotting his body in difficult terrain roughly 200 feet below Hermit Trail. Helicopter recovery was required. The cause was not established publicly, so that is where the story stops. But the rescue lesson is obvious. Location matters, terrain matters, weather matters, heat matters. Other emergencies happening at the same time matter. The National Park Service also states that search and rescue operations themselves are paid by taxpayers, while ground ambulance transport and supporting commercial aeromedical transportation can become the patient's financial responsibility. There is no verified current average bill in the dossier, so there is no reason to invent one. The important number is time. When your body is failing, hours or days is not an abstract warning. It is part of the hazard. So who gets into serious trouble in this system? The best scientific profile in the dossier comes from the Grand Canyon Heat Illness Study, not Hermit alone. Among 474 non-sodal heat-related illness cases from 2004 through 2009, the median age was about 43. Roughly 51% were female and 49% male. About 37.9% were ages 26 to 49. Another 30.9% were 50 to 65. Around 10.2% were 65 or older. About 90% were hiking. Around 40% required helicopter evacuation. Cardiovascular disease was the most commonly reported chronic medical category, at roughly 17.5 to 18%. The 6 identified heat-related fatalities in that study were mostly male, and all were hiking. But the sample was small and included adults across multiple age groups. Now look at the 3 strongest Hermit-linked heat fatalities in the dossier. Janet Comella was 57. Nuria Surratt was 46. Michelle Metter was 53. All 3 were on planned multi-day backcountry trips rather than casual rim sightseeing. Comella had a permit and was hiking with her husband. Surratt was on an extended 5-day itinerary involving Boucher and Hermit. Metter was on a multi-day Hermit to Bright Angel itinerary. That is too small a sample to define a statistical victim profile. But it destroys an easy stereotype. These are not simply reckless outliers doing something obviously absurd beside a cliff. Several documented victims were middle-aged backpackers undertaking legitimate canyon trips. That is why the phrase, "this could be you," works here only if it is said carefully. Not because everyone is equally vulnerable, because competence reduces risk without making physiology negotiable. Hermit Trail is not malicious. It does not need to be. It begins near developed facilities, drops almost 2,000 feet in its first 2.5 miles, offers no drinking water along the trail, and makes you earn the elevation back after heat and exertion have already taken their share. The canyon keeps a ledger. That is the fact I keep coming back to. The dangerous moment may not be the dramatic one. It may be the ordinary moment when the bill finally comes due and your body has less margin left than you thought. Hermit does not care whether the deficit came from heat, your heart, hydration, fatigue, or one bad step. It just keeps operating. Which mechanism surprised you most, and which dangerous place should I break down next? If you want more documentaries about the real reasons these places kill, subscribe.